put together this quick training to walk you through exactly what the relationship identity framework is, how it works, and why couples are seeing real transformation within 60 days when they've spent years in therapy without getting any results. So stick with me for the next couple of minutes, because by the end of this, you're going to have a much clearer picture of what's possible for your marriage and what needs to change to actually get there. Okay, so what is this all about? The relationship identity framework is a way for married couples to go from feeling like roommates, walking on eggshells, that feeling of constant tension and disconnection, to actually feeling safe, connected, and alive together again. And we're talking about doing this within 60 days, not 60 years. Here's what that actually looks like. You'll rebuild emotional safety. So conversations stop feeling like landmines, and you can actually talk to each other without it turning into a fight or shutting down completely. You'll reconnect with each other, not through forced date nights or communication exercises that feel awkward and fake, but through identifying real moments where you already feel connected and intentionally expanding on them. You'll feel like partners again. Instead of feeling like you're managing a household together or you're just co-parenting, you'll actually enjoy being married to each other again. And here's what you won't have to do. You won't have to spend years in therapy rehashing the past and analyzing every fight you've ever had. You won't have to attend awkward marriage retreats where you're forced to do trust falls and talk about your feelings in front of strangers. You won't have to read another book about the 5 love languages or 7 principles that are great in theory, but don't actually change anything when you get home when there's real tension. You won't have to keep living in a marriage that feels more like a prison than a partnership. This is about building the marriage you actually want to be living in weeks, not years. Now, you're probably wondering, what is the relationship identity framework? And why does it work when traditional therapy and books and everything else hasn't? Let me give you some context, okay? Most couples who are struggling in their marriage, they're feeling disconnected, they're fighting, they're walking on eggshells, they don't feel like they're comfortable having a normal conversation, so they try therapy first. It makes sense. That's kind of what we're told to do. Here's what happens in most couples therapy sessions. You spend session after session talking about what's wrong, what you're fighting about, why you fight, what happened in your childhood that made you this way, or why do you feel distant, or why do you retreat when you feel like you might fight. And we start analyzing communication patterns and figuring out what's wrong so we can give suggestions for what's right. And you know what happens with this? Here's the real problem with this approach. The focus of your marriage becomes problems. The focus of your marriage becomes what's wrong with it. And when you're constantly focused on what's wrong and on the problems and on that negative past, how could you possibly ever see hope? It blinds you from the hope. It doesn't create momentum. It makes you feel more broken. This is the biggest mistake I see in couples' work. Most approaches to marriage help focus on fixing what's broken instead of building what you actually want. I see this over and over again in my work. Couples come to therapy, they spend months and sometimes even longer than that talking about problems, hoping for a solution, but actually walking out feeling worse than when they started. I knew couples that stopped couples therapy altogether and started feeling better, and their marriage was still not in the right place yet. So I started asking different questions. What if instead of trying to fix what's broken, we build what you actually want? And that's what the relationship identity framework does. Instead of organizing your marriage around what's wrong, we start by defining who you actually want to be together. Not who you were 10 years ago when you first got married. Not some idealized version from a romance novel, but realistically, what kind of marriage do you actually want to be living? What does safe, connected, and alive look like for you? That's what actually happened with Sarah and Mike. Name changed and details changed to prevent confidentiality. But after a decade plus of being married, they were completely disconnected. They'd spent 6 months in couples therapy, and it made them feel much worse, like they were broken, like they needed to be fixed. And it turned into blaming sessions. They didn't like it. Within 30 days of defining who they actually wanted to be together, what their relationship identity actually was, they finally were able to have safe conversations for the first time in a long time. They were able to look forward to coming home to each other again. Sarah told me they were able to be more calm in conversations because she felt deeply seen. In the moments where there was still tension, that tension was far less extreme and it didn't feel like the end of the relationship. And once we have clarity on that, on your relationship identity, we do something really powerful. We look back at your relationship and we identify the times that you've already experienced glimpses of that identity. Moments where you felt safe, moments where you felt connected, moments where you actually enjoyed being together. Because here's the thing, those moments already exist in your relationship. They're buried under all that tension, under all that fighting, under all that resentment. If somehow you were able to give attention to them, you'd be able to see more of them. And if you saw more of those moments of connection, and you were able to create more of those moments of connection, how do you think that would impact the tension level in your relationship? Jennifer and Tom, again, names changed, discovered this in our work together. They were on the verge of separation. There was constant fighting, walking on eggshells. They felt like roommates, and they tried everything. They therapy, books, courses, nothing seemed to have worked for them. But when we excavated the moments where they felt connected in the past, when we identified what was actually happening during those moments, they started to see what was possible. Within the first month of applying this framework, they started seeing real shifts. By 90 days, Tom shared how he didn't think this was even possible. He shared how he was able to feel close because his relationship wasn't just defined by problems. It was something much more than that. And this is what I discovered. When couples can identify what was happening during those moments of connection, they can create more of them intentionally. I'm not here to try to fix you. I'm not here to try to force you to communicate in a way that is unnatural to you or express love in a way that is foreign to you. I'm not here to figure out why you're broken so I could fix you like I'm some sort of car mechanic that's going to diagnose all your problems. I'm here to help you do more of what already works. I'll give you an example from David and Lisa. Again, names changed. They'd been married for more than 10 years. They drifted apart. No more big blow-ups anymore because they barely spoke. They barely touched. They didn't look at each other. It just felt too dangerous. It was easier to avoid conversation with avoiding confrontation. And they assumed that like that's life. That's what happens in long marriages. Within 2 months of intentionally creating more moments of connection that they used to have, more of what already worked for them, they were laughing together again. Lisa shared how household chores and busy life responsibilities felt easier because there was a meaningful relationship that it was actually supporting. And then the final piece. This is what makes this all sustainable. I train you in the skill of noticing. Most couples who make progress in therapy feel better for a couple of weeks. And then when life gets stressful, they slide right back into the old patterns. Because at moments of deep intensity or high tension, all the skills and tools you've learned don't really help at those moments. They go out the window. But when you develop the skill of noticing, when you recognize, hey, we just had a moment of connection, let's do more of that. Or, hey, we're slipping back into those negative cycles, let's course correct. That's when the transformation becomes self sustaining. You're not dependent on me. You're not dependent on therapy. You're not dependent on anything external. You've developed the internal skill to keep creating the version of marriage that you want. That's the relationship identity framework. It's not therapy. It's not advice. It's not me telling you what to do. It's a process of helping you define who you want to be together. Identify when you've already experienced that. Expand those moments and train the skill of noticing so it lasts. And that's why it works when everything else hasn't. Okay, you might be thinking, Josh, sounds great. What's the catch? If this is so effective, why aren't more therapists doing this? Why haven't I heard this before? It's a fair question, and I'll be honest with you. Couple of things here. First, this approach is based on decades of clinical research. It's called solution focused brief therapy in the academic world, or SFBT. And there are decades, and I'm talking about like 5 decades, over 50 years of research and articles and so much on the effectiveness of SFBT on relationships. It's not some sort of new gimmick that I made up. Most therapists do not take this approach. They're trained in a different model. They're trained in the problem focused model, where you spend months or even years trying to figure out what's wrong. That's what they've learned in grad school, and that's what most therapists are taught. That's what they know. I was trained differently, and I've seen firsthand that when you shift from being problem focused to solution focused, from organizing around what's wrong to building what you actually want, couples get faster results. Second, I do charge for this work. It's not free. But let me just put something in perspective. If you are stuck in a marriage where you're feeling disconnected, where you're walking on eggshells, where you're questioning the longevity of that marriage, there's a price that you're paying that's costing you emotionally, it's costing you mentally, it's costing you your quality of life, it's costing you your family. If God forbid you do end up getting divorced, there's also a financial strain as well. Couples tell me all the time that coming to me is cheaper than a divorce. Working on the marriage is cheaper than a divorce. I'm not here to convince you that you should work on your marriage, but if you do believe that there is hope, then it's certainly something worth at least exploring. I genuinely believe that this approach is the best way to transform a struggling marriage efficiently. That's why I do this work. Now, you could figure this out on your own. You could read books. You can watch stuff on YouTube, and or go to a traditional therapy that's just going to take insurance. If that works for you, by the way, I'm not here to talk you out of it. But if you've tried those things and you're still feeling stuck, then consider trying something different, because that's exactly what this is.